Oh dear. Hi, Cody. Good morning, everyone. So as you might have noticed, my name's Reagan. Um, oh no. Wow. All right. Well, good morning, and again, welcome. I am one of the co-community life pastors here at the Vineyard, and so I get the pleasure of continuing us in our sermon series today. And as you can tell, I've been here at the Vineyard for a lot of years, and so I got a lot of friends that like to fluster me a little bit. So, anyways, all right. Oh no. I know you can't mute them. I am so sorry. Okay. On that note, so we are in the middle of a sermon series called Redeemed. And in this series, we've been looking at some of the key figures in the lineage of Jesus to learn about what it means to be redeemed by God. So we've been talking about how redemption is often marked by a turning point or an action or something that makes up for one's shortcomings. It's kind of a clearing of debt. And from how the beginning of time, basically, or of our story, that God has been making up for our shortcomings and paying the price so that he can have us as his own. That's kind of where we are right now. And we're looking toward Easter, which is only 5 weeks away. So all y'all who have to get decorations out for your house like me, it's only 5 weeks away. Okay. But the reason we're looking toward Easter is because we are looking to celebrate that greatest act of redemption ever in Jesus. So that's why our sermon series is redemption right now. Okay. So in this series, we've seen over and over and over again how God has been working his redemptive plan in humanity. And he's been pulling us up kind of out of the pits that we all kind of find ourselves in, and he's been setting our feet into the right path. And so one of the places we've seen this is in Jesus' own family, and we've been looking at his family tree because it's a beautiful tapestry of amazing redemptive stories that are all woven together. And every single one of them is unique, but they all kind of have this pattern where the people in the story are a bit of a hot mess of their own making. And so God comes into the story and turns it around. So we looked at the story of Jacob, also known as Israel, a couple of weeks ago, and we learned that redemption comes from growing awareness of God and also like reframing our struggles, but that it requires some courage and it requires some surrender. And last week we looked at the story of Judah, and we learned that receiving redemption, to receive it, we need to stop running from our mistakes and face them instead. Kind of a hard challenge sometimes. But what we learned also is that redemption allows us to pursue reconciliation. So we've got stuff we got to stop running from, but that we get to pursue reconciliation because of it. So we're going to look again at Matthew chapter 1, at Jesus' family tree to kind of see where we are in the tree. All right. So this is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob. Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez the father of Hezron. Hezron the father of Ram. Ram the father of Amminadab. Amminadab the father of Nahshon. Nahshon the father of Salmon. Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. And we're going to stop there because there's a lot of complicated names after this part, but also because today we are going to look at the story of Rahab, who's mentioned in our genealogy as the mother of Boaz. But before we do, let's pray. Holy Spirit, we ask you to come and be in this space with us. Thank you that we're able to come together and spend a little time looking at your word and looking at these beautiful stories in your own family so that we can learn more about your love and your redemption. Okay. So I love this because it's story time. And last week we left off with the story of Judah. And Judah has just been reconciled to his brother Joseph, and the whole family's decided to move to Egypt. And these are the 12 brothers who lived in Egypt. So there's 12 of them, and they had kids, and their kids had kids, and their kids' kids had kids, and so on and so on. For 400 years, this group of people we know as the Israelites lived in Egypt. So these 12 brothers, they're the sons of Jacob, also known as Israel. One of those people who name got changed. So they are the 12 tribes of the Israelites. It was based off of the names of these 12 brothers. And originally they went to Egypt to be saved, but a couple of generations in, they ended up becoming the slaves of the Egyptians within that 400-year span, which meant, as the story goes, God needed to help them out with that. So he rescued the Israelites from their slavery through what I find to be a pretty awesome and kind of crazy story about this dude named Moses and a whole bunch of plagues and God parting the Red Sea. And if you've never heard this story, I encourage you to read it. It's the book of Exodus in the Bible. It's kind of crazy, pretty wild, actually. So if you don't have a Bible, there's a ton of apps. But talk to Eric. He's back at the sound booth, myself or Chaz, after service, and we'll get you a printed one. So if you haven't read this story, let us know. We'll hook you up. All right, so we've got that going on. So the Israelites, they were in Egypt for 400 years, then they get saved from Egypt. They walk on dry land through the middle of the Red Sea, which is no small thing. So they've just experienced this, and they still struggle to follow God, or at least follow him faithfully. So they end up wandering in the desert for another 40 years. And so we're at the point in the story where a new leader has been installed. His name's Joshua. Sorry, lots of J names. His name's Joshua. And this group of people is finally ready to enter a land that they call the Promised Land, because way back at the beginning of the story, in the first person in the genealogy, Abraham, God promised Abraham that this land would belong to his descendants and to what we know as the Israelites. So way back at the beginning, we have a promise. And that's where we're going to pick up our story in Joshua chapter 2. Then Joshua secretly sent out 2 spies from the Israelite camp at Acacia Grove. He instructed them, scout out the land on either side of the Jordan River, especially around Jericho. Jericho's a really big city with a lot of power at that time. So 2 men set out, and they came to the house of a prostitute named Rahab, and they stayed there that night. But someone told the king of Jericho, "Some Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land." So the king of Jericho sent orders to Rahab, "Bring out the men who have come into your house, for they have come here to spy out the whole land." Rahab had hidden the 2 men, but she replied to the king, "Yes, the men were here earlier, but I didn't know where they were from. They left the town at dusk, and as the gates were about to close, I don't know where they went. If you hurry, you can probably catch them." Actually, she'd taken them up to the roof of her house and hidden them between a bunch of bundles of flax that she had laid out. So the king's men go on looking for the spies on the road leading the shallow crossings of the Jordan River, and as soon as the king's men have left, the gate of Jericho is shut. All right, so what can we learn about redemption from Rahab's story so far? The very first thing that we get to learn is that redemption comes as an opportunity. See, this story gives us a little bit of insight into Rahab's situation. So we know she's a Canaanite living in Jericho, because that's the name of the people group that are living in the promised land that we've been told to go conquer. So she's a Canaanite living in Jericho, which means she's a pagan. We know from earlier in the story that the Israelites, Joshua and the Israelites, have been told by God to go destroy that people group and to conquer them. And on top of that, she's a prostitute. So we know that that implies she's lower in the social ladder within her own community. So we know she's got some stuff. And 2 spies have just shown up on her doorstep. And I'm pretty sure Jericho is buzzing with the news that the Israelites are coming to conquer the land. So here's a little map. I couldn't find a great one, but I found that has a scale. But this one's nice because it shows you on the east side of the Jordan, you've got where the spies start in the story. They go over and they scout around Jericho, and then they head back over to the Israelite camp. So you kind of can see that in our map. And what you need to know is we're estimating that's about 15-ish miles. So not very far. The Israelites are just kind of a few rock chucking distance away from Jericho. And so the people of Jericho are aware that they are there. I can't imagine any way they wouldn't know they're there. And they know that they're a threatening presence. So that takes us back to Rahab. She's got 2 spies. She's got the enemy at her door. So what's she going to do? Does she turn them away? Does she tell the authorities that the enemy's in the city? Or does she show them hospitality? What would we do? What would you do in that situation? Rahab she chose to show them hospitality, to take them into her home and to protect them. It'd be interesting to know how many people's faith journeys kind of start in the same way through an act of hospitality like Rahab. It's amazing how seriously our ancient cultures treated this idea of hospitality. We see it over and over again throughout the Bible. So in the story of Abraham, that guy I mentioned that was the beginning of our genealogy. So in Abraham, in about Genesis 18, we see that he encounters these just 3 random guys and invites them into his tent. He feeds them. He shows them hospitality. It's kind of a crazy story because they then tell Abraham, hey, you're going to have a son, which doesn't sound all that remarkable until you realize that Abraham and his wife Sarah are super old. Like super old. Like, listen, older than any human in this room. They are super old, and now they're going to have a kid. So that's kind of interesting story. Again, there's some interesting stories to go back and read. Another one, just the next chapter in Genesis is Genesis 19. There's this guy named Lot. He's related to Abraham. And he shows hospitality in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah by offering up his own daughters rather than to allow harm to come to his guests. We won't go too far into that whole situation, but just know he's showing extreme hospitality in that particular set of circumstances. And it seems that Rahab is showing that same reverence for that host and guest relationship here in our story. And it's not just the Old Testament either. If we look at Hebrews 13:2, Paul, one of our apostles, he tells us that to take every opportunity to show hospitality to strangers, for some have even entertained angels unaware. And then Jesus tells us in Luke chapter 14, 12 through 14, he tells us, turns to his host and he says, when you put on a luncheon or a banquet, don't invite your friends and brothers and relatives and rich neighbors because they're going to invite you back and that's your only reward. Instead, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. Because then at the resurrection of righteousness, God will reward you for inviting those who could not repay you. So even Jesus is saying, hey, your reward's going to be great, but show hospitality. Invite this other group of people. See, when we discuss redemption, a lot of times we spend a lot of time being preoccupied with our own redemption. What is it that we need to be redeemed for? But have you ever thought about how God might use you to do the work of redemption in others, in your neighborhood, at your workplace, the people that we encounter on a day-to-day basis? There's so many opportunities to show God's people, or we're all God's people, right? To show people God's love and hospitality, and it could just utterly change their story. So in the case of these spies, accepting hospitality from a foreigner not only saved their lives, but in turn, it completely changed Rahab's life. So it was like a two-way situation here. Let's pause for a moment and think about those spaces where you have felt most welcome. Perhaps it's a friend's house or a family member's house. But wherever it is, most likely it's a place where you felt like you could relax or just be yourself. Because when we think of these places, hospitality typically is a theme. I had a neighbor growing up in St. Louis that is one of the people that comes to mind when I think about spaces where I just always felt welcome. My neighbor Sada was always cooking something delicious, and we had many opportunities to sample her cooking. She taught my dad some recipes I still try to make him make for me when I go to visit. There's always a ton of people at Sada's house. Her husband is a pilot who flew for an international airline, I think Tanzanian Airlines or something like that. So her husband's is a pilot, so he's in and out because of his flight schedule. But she's got her children with her, and then a whole bunch of people that we only knew as cousins. So they're all somehow related, but they're their cousins. And it was just always a party at Sada's house. And we were always welcome to their celebrations, even if we had absolutely no idea what was going on, because no one in my family speaks Swahili, and everybody in Sada's family spoke Swahili, including the most adorable little 2-3-year-old you ever saw in your life. She'd come talk to me, and I'd just smile, give her some hugs, no idea. I remember lots of like backyard barbecue parties, and one that's like really distinctive is a memory where there was a wedding celebration. And we as the neighbors got drug into the wedding celebration. And there's like this huge dance line with all of the women. And we had all kinds of fun that night. It was great fun because it was a space that everyone was welcome, even the clueless neighbors. When's the last time you invited someone just over for dinner? Someone from your work or a neighbor, just kind of to be friendly or generous? Do you make spaces where people can just come in and feel welcome? Do you recognize those opportunities when they come your way and then actually act on them? Now, I think Boaz, who's Rahab's son, and he's the husband of Ruth, people from our genealogy, might have learned a thing or two about hospitality from his mama, because we have the story about Boaz and Ruth, and we have to save it for another day. Spoiler alert, Jazz is going to talk about them next week. But let's just say, as you listen to it next week, you're probably going to hear some themes because there's portions where Boaz is showing welcoming hospitality to an outsider, in this case, Ruth. So, spoiler alert, come next week. It's a good story. You see, hospitality is a kingdom value. You never know if that simple act of inviting someone over for dinner is the catalyst that God's going to use for his redemptive plan to break into their life, or maybe even yours. All right, let's jump back to Rahab and see what she's up to. Continuing in our story, before the spies went to sleep that night, Rahab goes up on the roof to talk to them. I know the Lord has given you this land, she tells them. We're all afraid of you. Everyone in this land is living in terror. For we have heard how the Lord has made a dry path for you through the Red Sea, and when you left Egypt, and we know what you did to Sihon and Og, beginning of the book of Joshua, because the 2 Amorite kings east of the Jordan River, whose people you completely destroyed. So no wonder our hearts have melted in fear. No one has the courage to fight after hearing such things. For the Lord your God is the supreme God of heavens above and the earth below. So now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. It keeps going in the rest of Joshua 2. Here we see the spies. They're agreeing to protect Rahab and her family. And then Rahab lowers them out the window of her house because she lives in the wall. So she lowers them out the window of her house so they can escape. And the spies return to Joshua. So that's the rest of that little section of Joshua 2. Rahab chose to go up and talk to those spies and tell them about the fear that has gripped her community. But somehow it hasn't completely gripped her. Her home's in the walls of Jericho. Not on the walls, not next to the walls, in the walls. which is indicative of her poverty because all the people with all the money, they live closer to the center of the city. If you live in the walls and it's going to be attacked, the enemy comes through the poor people's windows to get into the city. Yeah? So in this, Rahab takes a hard look around at what's going on, and she fought for the only things worth saving, her family. The rest, she wasn't afraid to let go of, because she saw there was more for her to gain than there was for her to lose. And in this, we see the next piece of redemption. The redemption requires our faith to be stronger than our fear. In the story of Rahab, her faith amazes me. She has so little of the story of God. So little. She knows that they've been rescued from Egypt. She knows that God parted the Red Seas and a bunch of people walked across them. That's what she knows. So little. Yet she recognized that Yahweh is the one true God. The other people in Jericho heard the same story she did, but she believed. In fact, Rahab is known for her faith for generations to come. She made it into another section of the Bible I like to call the Faith Hall of Fame, which is Hebrews 11. So let's look just a little bit at Hebrews 11. It starts out, faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. Through their faith, the people in the days of old earned a good reputation. It has a whole big giant list of people who demonstrated great faith. People like Abraham, Isaac, Moses, David, a whole bunch of unnamed people who are martyred. Then we get to verse 31. It's by faith that Rahab the prostitute was not destroyed with the people in her city who refused to obey God, for she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. Hall of Fame, Rahab's Hall of Fame level faith person. She's only verse 31, and this passage is not that long. So she's she made the cut, the list. It's a pretty good list. All it does is give me a whole list of other stories to go figure out and read. All right. I can't help but think of all the waiting time, too. Between the point in Joshua 2, so Rahab has helped the spies out her window, made this promise, yeah, we'll save you. Well, she helps them out the window, and then there's all the waiting time between that point and the point where Jericho is actually conquered. So we've got all this waiting time. Jericho is going to be conquered. Joshua sends men, at that point, Joshua sends the men back to get Rahab and her family. That space of waiting had to be, frankly, terrifying. Yet we know that Rahab did what she said she would do and gathered all of her family and waited, trusting that the men are going to be true to their word and come save her and her family, and trusting that Yahweh really is that true God who's going to deliver Jericho into the hands of the Israelites. That's no small amount of faith, y'all. How do you handle fear? Do you lean into that faith and trust God, or do you freeze and turn away? For me, it's kind of a battle. Sometimes I'm okay, but when I let fear win, I have the unfortunate response of freezing. That can look like indecision, second-guessing myself, not taking action. All of those are symptoms of I'm frozen because I'm scared. Those are the moments I need to cry out to God for his help to kind of get over that whole circumstance. Thankfully, he's brought a lot of wonderful people alongside me who are willing to pray with me when I'm in that state of being frozen. I've also found it's another time where God speaks to me in kids' songs. The VeggieTales song, God is bigger than the boogeyman. He's bigger than Godzilla or the monsters on TV. Yeah, that tends to pop into my head when I'm in that space. Because God is so much bigger than the things I'm afraid of. And if I turn to him, he helps me through them in those moments of fear and helps me lean back into faith. So I ask you today, do you have something that causes you to freeze or to be fearful? If so, I'd encourage you to get prayer during our response time. Maybe God doesn't speak to you in kids' songs like he does to me, but I have learned that he is always there to help strengthen our faith and speak to you in a way that makes sense to you, to help us get over those fears. All right, we get to go to the final piece of Rahab's story today, which is we find in Joshua 6. So we are in Joshua 2. There's a whole bunch of stuff in between. And then we get to Joshua 6. And most of the stuff in between is the spies go back and the conquering army is coming forward. So meanwhile, Joshua said to the two spies, keep your promise. Go to the prostitute's house, bring her out along with all of her family. The men who had been spies went, and they brought out Rahab and her mother, and her father, and her brothers, and all the relatives that are with her, and they moved her whole family to a safe place near the camp of Israel. Then they burned the whole city and everything in it, but they put the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. Okay, that's part of what happens in the in-between. God gave them a bunch of instructions on what to do at Jericho, and that was part of it, destroy the whole city. So they followed through with their instructions. Verse 25, so Joshua spared Rahab, the prostitute, and her relatives who were in her house because she had hidden the spies that Joshua had sent to Jericho. My favorite sentence. And she lives among the Israelites to this day. Because here we see that Rahab and her family have not only been saved from that destruction of Jericho, but they joined the Israelites. They lived among them. They completely left that Canaanite culture, the people group they were from, and they joined an unfamiliar group of people based on faith. We get that same invitation, not just to be saved from our circumstances, but to be welcomed into the family of God. Because when you read in the Old Testament, the Israelites are the family of God. She's welcomed into that family. Sorry. That's not a little thing. That's a big thing. Because you see, redemption, it's going to require us to leave the familiar behind, but so that we can embrace what God has for us ahead. And that's saying something, because most of us know change is not easy. Even leaving a toxic, painful, frustrating situation, if we've become accustomed to it, it can be hard. Courage requires us to face our fears and to leave the boundaries of the familiar, leave our comfy zone, even a bad comfy zone, to leave our comfy zone and head out into those uncharted waters. And sometimes our greatest fear is actually going out into the unknown. For many of us, it's that uncertainty that is the fear. But to take a hold of God's redemptive plan for our life and for the lives of others means we need to be brave enough to brave the uncertain, to take a chance. Because faith is spelled R-I-S-K. So let me ask you, when's the last time that your faith felt a little risky? Rahab embraced the risk, and she got a whole new identity. At first, she's Rahab the prostitute. But through that risk and that redemption that God brings to her, she becomes Rahab the faithful. She's in the Hall of Fame, guys, for being faithful. And today, we get to be invited further into redemption. But we need to be prepared to embrace that opportunity, to let our faith be stronger than our fear, and to leave the familiar behind us. Is God asking you to step out into that unfamiliar space today? Maybe just talking about that idea of risk or unfamiliar makes your stomach turn a little bit. In my experience, those little butterflies might be an indication that God is moving or stirring something inside you. And you may already have an idea of what that opportunity is that he's calling you into, or the familiar that he wants you to leave out and leave it behind. If you've got that idea, I encourage you to pray this prayer with me right now. Lord, I surrender my discomfort and my fear to you. Help me to step out in faith and in risk. As I leave this place today, show me the opportunities you want me to take and help me embrace your plans in your kingdom.